Defund the police. Both Minneapolis and New York at this point are both literally talking about disbanding their police departments. So today I'm going to give you my reaction, and you're probably going to be surprised at what it is. What's my reaction? Have at it. With one caveat though. If we're going to start following the plots of Batman comic books, my caveat is you got to go all the way with it. So what do I mean by that? Well, I originally told you we're going to do a video on 1984 and how that's basically the playbook of the DNC today. But things are devolving so rapidly and so insanely that 1984 no longer fits. We've actually delved into the realm of comic books. If you haven't watched my Bane video, I'd say stop this. Go watch that first because it really covers this nicely. And then come on back and I'll tell you exactly what I mean. So do I really believe that the DNC is going to DC Comics and spinning through all the Batman books to come up with a strategy on how to approach America? No, I don't. But life often imitates art. And in the comic book world, they take real psychological drama and real events and they exaggerate it to hyperbolic proportions so they can tell both a compelling story and really drive a point home. That said, I have to kind of wonder that when the comics are plotted out over several years, like you saw with the Marvel universe, how it took about a decade to all unfold and it was all planned and one thing led to another. The same thing with this Batman series. One event had to lead to another, to another. It really makes us wonder if what we're undergoing right now could possibly have all been planned, directed, manufactured, and all intentional. So, the first book we're going to do is the seminal Batman work, probably the best book in comics ever written. It's Return of the Dark Knight. It is the book that's responsible for taking our concept of Batman from that 1966 campy TV show and turning him into the Batman we all know today. Well, in that book, we have a liberal, lefty, kind of cuck psychologist who loves the Joker, and his theory as he goes on these talking head TV shows over and over throughout the book is that Batman is the cause of all the crime in Gotham. His theory is that the extreme violence that Batman has to use to fight the villains is actually creating the villains. Now, in this imaginary world, to stop all the terrible violence between heroes and villains, what do? They get rid of all the heroes. Could never imagine that would happen in the real world. Fast forward a decade later, and this is where I say events start to spill one to the next, and it's all planned. 1996, we actually have a book, Contagion, and it's about a terrible virus that spreads through Gotham over a year period, and everyone's locked down. The rich, they're fine. The common man is losing his job, destroying businesses, and being locked down. They're basically just ready to lose their mind. Now, once we finally overcome that contagion, we have the book Cataclysm, which is a terrible earthquake hits Gotham. Now, the DNC cannot duplicate a earthquake. So, what's the next best thing? What's another way we can level buildings to the ground, destroy businesses, and just completely eradicate culture? How about a race war? How about a bunch of riots? Gotham is so destroyed that the federal government considers it beyond repair, a disaster area, and they declare it a no man's land. Gotham is no longer part of the United States. They allow everyone who wants to leave several weeks to get out of there and set up refugee areas, and whoever remains, they're no longer U.S. citizens. They blow the bridges, and it's no man's land. It's not eligible for federal relief, not eligible for federal assistance. It is no longer a land of laws. Anyone who stays, have at it. Now, here's where the comic book writers have far more common sense than these Democratic mayors. The writers realize that when you remove law and order and civilization, people revert back to barbarism and tribalism. According to the story, Gotham sectioned off into different areas. The crime bosses basically become clan leaders, and all the different clans just start fighting for territory, natural resources, exactly like mankind did for centuries before the invention of civilized government and organized police departments. Now contrast that with the spiritual morons who think that once you remove police, you will have a wonderful utopia where we all love each other and get along like Smurfs. Now, I call them spiritual morons and not intellectual morons because this is no longer a political debate. This is not an issue of two different parties wanting the same goals and thinking of different ways we can achieve them. This is not intellectual, this is a spiritual battle. The conflict we see today is a spiritual, theological, philosophical conflict. The battle is not political, but over the very nature of man. You see, the left holds to a secular humanist worldview, where the right follows a biblical worldview. Now, when I say that, am I saying that all conservatives are religious? No, absolutely not. But the Bible accurately and truthfully describes human nature. So there are atheists out there who have clear eyes and can see the obvious truth of who men are. Likewise, there are many people on the left who claim to be devout, but I'll let Paul describe exactly what's going on with them in 2 Timothy 3. It says, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, and having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. Avoid such people, for among them are those who creep into households and capture weak women, meaning their minds, burdened with sins and led astray by various passions, always learning and never able to arrive at knowledge of the truth. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so these men also opposed the truth, men corrupted in mind and disqualified regarding the faith. But they will not get very far, for their folly will be plain to all, as it was with those two men. The religion of the left goes as far back as Genesis 11 and maybe even before that. It's with Nimrod. It's secular humanism, all about the brotherhood of man. It basically believes that man is naturally good. It is only the institutions which corrupt him. That's why they focus outward. It used to be about reforming institutions. Now it's about just completely ripping them down. That's why they always use those words like systemic racism and institutional racism. Instead of focusing on the true problem with man, the true problem of racism, which is found in the heart of individuals. They see conservatives who cling to these eternal truths as divisive, and they need to be destroyed and pushed out of the way so that this new unified rainbow coalition of people can build a tower to the sky and challenge God himself and knock him off his throne. Conservatism, on the other hand, shares the biblical worldview of our founders. And in that view, we are created in the image of God. And because all men are created in the image of God, we're thus equal, endowed by that Creator with certain inalienable rights. That among these are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The problem is, even though we're created in the image of God, we are also fallen. We are infected with original sin. And our nature is to always do evil, to be selfish, and to do harm to our fellow man. And it is because of this that even though we possess all these natural rights in a perfect state of nature, to secure these rights, government is instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So our founders were wise enough to create laws to protect our natural rights from both our neighbors and also from the government itself. Our system of government was the most optimistic experiment ever in politics in the history of man. But it was anchored with a healthy skepticism about the nature of man, which was based on a biblical worldview. See, two things are necessary to keep a society from devolving into barbarism. The first is a unified culture with a common belief in a God who judges us in the afterlife. Now, per Jonathan Adams in a speech to the military in 1798, we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, and is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. The left has done everything they can to chip away at that pillar of our society over the past 60 years. And now that they've fairly successfully removed God from government and from culture, they've now focused all their attacks over the past 12 years on that other aspect that can protect us and keep us from devolving into complete chaos, and that is the thin blue line. This isn't the first time this occurred in history. The French Revolution pretty quickly followed our revolution. But whereas the American Revolution was based on a biblical paradigm, the French Revolution followed the left-wing secular humanist worldview. Americans were asserting their rights as men. The French leftist Jacobins were full of hate and wanted to destroy everything which they thought was oppressing them. And according to them, it was the state and the church. And much like Antifa, who has modeled themselves after the Jacobins today, they burned everything they could to the ground. They started thinking that their cult of reason would lead them to a beautiful land of liberty, equality, and fraternity, but what they got instead was the terror. They got rid of the King's Police and replaced them with their own. And they became far more oppressive than the previous ones ever were. You see, the left is never satisfied. They must always be pushing their new agenda. And unlike the old guard, which only policed your actions, now under this left-wing regime, your thoughts were policed as well. And whoever didn't proclaim the state dogma, the collective, politically correct belief system, they got their head cut off. That's what happened there. That's what happened in every single communist revolution since, and that is exactly what will happen here. Police, and within days, they will know they need some kind of armed force to patrol and protect them from tearing themselves apart. Now, the people doing this policing won't have the training that our current professional policing have amassed over 2 centuries of progressive techniques and professionalization. And they're going to be angered and disillusioned that their brothers in the cause aren't creating the utopia they expected, and that it crumbled so fast and their own people are turning against them. And the people that they're policing will have been convinced and conditioned at that point that they don't need to be policed and they don't need to comply. And the result will be violence like we have never seen nor could ever imagine. So, do I really think it's okay for them to decommission and defund the police as long as they blow the bridges in New York? No, obviously I don't. Because unlike de Blasio, I actually care for his citizens. But de Blasio doesn't mean it either. I said it just to make a point, and de Blasio said it just to score some points.